All right, I think we're going to get started. It's 7 o'clock. So good evening, everyone, and thanks so much for joining us. This webinar is being hosted by the Office of Sustainability at Lakehead University, and my name is Lita McKellar, and I'm the Sustainability Coordinator for Lakehead University. This webinar, is part 2 of our webinar series, Sustainability in the Time of COVID-19. And with the global pandemic, we thought many of us are spending a lot of time at home, and we wanted to offer a series of webinars that support sustainability and connecting to nature, despite the fact that many of us are spending more time at home. We know it's incredibly important to connect to the natural world for our mental, emotional, physical, and spiritual health. And it's also important to connect to our food. In some cases, many common edibles can even be found pretty close to home. Foraging is a wonderful way to develop a sense of place, to connect with and learn about plants and other living beings, and in doing so, hopefully deepen our sense of care for the natural world. And as we know, it can be great for our bellies too. So today's webinar will focus on the basic tenets of foraging, and Karen Stevenson will present this webinar. She is an expert wild food educator, chartered herbalist, author, professional writer, researcher, acute canine herbalism specialist, and a certified master naturalist with Lakehead University. She is also working on her master thesis on the immune-enhancing effects of Grifola frondosa, maitake mushrooms, also known as, at Dominion Herbal College in BC, the oldest herbal school in Canada. I'm very excited that Karen agreed to present this webinar, as she has a vast amount of knowledge and experience on foraging. Even in the preliminary conversations we had leading up to this webinar, Karen has already begun to bust some common myths I had around foraging. Probably like many of us, I was eager to get outside and pick wild foods, forgetting that to do so responsibly, there is a lot of preliminary knowledge required. And she has reminded me to slow down and have some patience and appreciate the process of foraging and not just the result. So before we start, I do have a couple of quick housekeeping logistics to go over. I want to let you know this webinar is being recorded so that we can upload it on our websites. And due to the enormous interest in this webinar, 1,000 people registered, we have disabled your video and audio functions. But that being said, we know that many of you have lots of questions, and we will be stopping for a couple of questions twice during the presentation, and then we have reserved the final portion of the presentation for a question and answer. If you have any questions, please use the Q&A box. It should be at the bottom of your Zoom panel. If you see a question in the Q&A box that someone else has submitted and you'd like it answered, you can upvote it. When you do this, it brings it higher in the prioritization, and it's more likely to be answered. So please only use the chat box if you have technical issues or comments, and keep the questions to the Q&A box. They're more likely to happen that way. Lastly, we know that foraging covers a broad area, so please keep questions specific to the topic discussed tonight. There are a lot of people joining us today, so just to keep on time and avoid duplication, please be sure to listen well so you avoid asking a question that's already been covered. Please also note that Lakehead University is not assuming responsibility for you if you go foraging. Any foraging done is at your own responsibility. And please make sure you educate yourself before you go out, and if you're in doubt, check with an expert. So again, thanks so much for joining us. I'm looking forward to the presentation myself. And with that, I'm going to pass it over to Karen.
Thank you, Lita. And welcome everybody. This is really exciting for me, and I truly hope that this evening you will be able to take with you some great information and head off into your fields and forests and be able to gather lots of fresh greens and other delights that there are out there. Anyways, I just want to say a very special thank you to Lita for doing this evening, as well as to Lakehead University. Okay, so let's get started. We're going to begin with the 2 most common questions I get asked. What is this? Is it edible? I have received literally hundreds, thousands of emails over the years from people submitting a photograph saying, what is this? Is it edible? And this is, in my opinion, the wrong approach to foraging. Number 1, let's answer, is it edible? Theoretically, everything is edible at least once. Many of you are probably chuckling, saying, yeah, I've heard that. I've gone on plant walks and I've heard this before, and it's true. you don't want to take that chance. It's just not worth it. It's exciting. As Lita was saying, getting out there and foraging, it connects you with the land. It connects you with nature. And the last thing you want to do is make a mistake. For example, when you're out there and you want to know, is this plant edible? Well, there's a yes and no component to it, because many plants have only certain parts of the plant that are edible, like perhaps only the root, perhaps only the leaves. And this is where we have to know the plants intimately. And how much of this specific plant can you consume? Some plants contain certain constituents in which the human body can only process a little at a time. So if you eat too much, you're going to get yourself into a bit of trouble. After all, what would happen if you ate a huge bowl of prunes? We know what's going to happen. So you have to think about it from that perspective. And also, like many other foods that we get in a grocery store, many of these wild foods that we will find foraging also contain oxalic acid, which to a healthy individual, the amounts are very small and we don't have to worry about it. But if you have kidney issues, you're counting those oxalic acid molecules to make sure that you're protecting yourself, and understandably so. And also, what is this? Is it edible? One thing to always remember, and you can Google this, there is something out there called the Universal Edibility Test. This is, I think it was developed originally by the SAS in Great Britain. And this is a way to find out whether your body is going to be able to handle the food that you're ready to eat. This is really important. It may be safe to consume, but maybe your body's just not going to react well to it. So let's kind of slow down and not make any errors. Over harvesting. Now, this is, depending on where you live, this is a serious issue, because there are a lot of purveyors of wild food and places that sell herbs for medicinal purposes. And this has brought many plants to the brink of extinction. Now, there's been some great efforts by governments to bring back many of these plants. Two plants in particular, ginseng and golden seal. Those two are really hard to find, and when you do, it costs a lot to purchase them, and there's a reason why. They've been over harvested. So we really need to be careful in terms of how much to harvest when we're out there. And one thing to also keep in mind, a lot of people will say we've got to be mindful, watch out how much we forage in one given area. But really, in reality, some plants, it doesn't matter. For example, the lamb's quarter. The lamb's quarter plant, when reaching full maturity, can produce up to 160,000 seeds. And those seeds are viable in the soil for up to 40 years. We don't have to worry about being sustainable with the lamb's quarter. The common dandelion. One dandelion can produce up to 5,000 seeds. Those seeds are viable in the earth for up to 5 years. So plants like that, we don't have to worry about, but our native plants, we should be worried about. Now, let's get into the law. We need to know, where can we go to forage? Many towns and cities across North America now have laws about plant protection. So there is no one blanket answer as to where can I go to harvest and where to go foraging. This is up to you. You need to search and find out answers from your local government, your province, your state, and of course federally. For example, a federal park in Canada, if you take a plant, a protected plant from a federal park in Canada, that's going to land you up with a $25,000 fine. Not worth it. Certainly not worth it. So it's really, really, really important to get to know the laws in your local area. Wildman Steve Brill, he's one of the original wild food educators. He's been around for many years, an incredible individual. And many years ago, he got a fine for picking a dandelion in Central Park. So again, check your local laws. You don't want to end up with a fine. And specific plants in particular, this is one plant here in Ontario, the round-leaved greenbrier. This is a plant that is on the threatened list. So even though this is a plant that is technically considered edible, you don't want to pick this because it is a threatened species in the province of Ontario. However, many places in the United States, this grows profusely, and there's no worries whatsoever in terms of being able to harvest it. Now, I want to say thank you to Toadshade Wildflower Farm for allowing me to use this photograph. These are incredible folks. If you're in New Jersey, please support them. And not only are the tendrils of this specific plant and the leaves edible for those who are in a position where you can forage for it, check out those tubers. Absolutely amazing. And I want to have a special shout out to Mark. He's one of my colleagues. He is the foragingtexas.com guy and Foraging Texas. His information is absolutely incredible, and I urge you to also check out his website. Definitely a trustworthy source. So what we're going to do right now, let's pause right here. And any questions about what I've just spoken about, we'll get those done.
So it looks like most of the questions will probably be taken at the end. I don't see too many that are relevant to what you just said. You'll be talking about resources at the end, I know. One person has asked if it's illegal to forage on park property, and I think you just addressed that. So I think
I'll just reiterate about the park property. You have to check with your community, your local town, your local city, because every answer for every town may be different. So again, you've got to check with your local municipality or towns to find out the answer to that.
Perfect. And one person is asking, can you please reiterate the universal test that you mentioned?
Absolutely. It's a test that I believe that was, I'm about 99% sure it was developed by the SAS, which is a special elite force in Great Britain. And the edibility test, the 101 version of it, is you take a plant, you take the leaf, you break it up a bit to get the juice of the leaf. You're going to rub it on the forearm, left or right forearm, doesn't matter. And if within a half hour to an hour you have any reaction, then you know this is a plant you definitely do not want to eat. And the reaction can be something as simple as itching, redness, hives, lumps, bumps, and then it goes to testing it on your lips and then trying a little bit in your mouth. So if you just Google the universal edibility test, you'll find out how it's quite in depth, but I certainly urge anybody who's new to foraging to make sure you check that out.
Perfect. And then I guess the last question before we move on is, do you know where you would find the list of Ontario protected plants?
I believe the website is, if you go to the Ontario provincial website, there's they do have a page somewhere about the endangered species or protected species, and all the plants there fall under the Protected Species Act of Ontario.
Thank you. I think we can move on and we'll get to some of the other questions in the next part of the presentation.
Okay. So before we get into more information, I'm just going to do a little bit of self-promotion. At my website, EdibleWildFood.com, I sell Fields of Nutrition and Winter Survival Food. These are roughly 5x7 pocketbooks, very thick, gloss paper. And should you decide to purchase both copies, then I will be sending you 5 PDF publication files of your choice. Now, my PDF publications are specific to one plant. What you see here is cattails. And each PDF publication has very comprehensive information from the history of the plant to the overview and identification, recipes, nutritional information. And but anyways, you can just check out my website later. And again, if you purchase both books, then you get 5 PDF files of your choice. But when you go to the checkout part, make sure you put webinar 101. So we're out there. We're going to get foraging now. What do you take with you? Well, first of all, I didn't put a bottle of water in there. So that's really important because you want to make sure you're staying hydrated. However, this is for tools. Depending on what you specifically want to go out there foraging for, we'll obviously determine what you want to take with you. So if you don't want to get your hands dirty, take a pair of garden gloves. Garden shears are good, a little snips there. A trowel is always a great thing to have with you. The hacksaw that you see is if you're going out with the hopes of finding chaga. You have to have a hacksaw with chaga because you're just not going to get it off off a birch tree any other way. And the shovel. Now, you're certainly not going to be traipsing around with a shovel, but if you're going out with the specific purpose of wanting to gather burdock root, you're not going to get that burdock root with a trowel. You have to have a shovel. When you go out, where are you going to go? And determine what footwear is best to support your ankles as you're walking. So if you're going into some pretty rugged terrain, you need a pair of footwear like this. If you're just going along a trail in a forest, you wouldn't have to be so stringent with footwear. But again, just make sure that you get the proper footwear for the environment in which you're going to be checking out. Weather. Depending on where you live, always make sure you check the weather report before you head out one day, because the last thing you want is to be out there, you're caught in a thunderstorm. And even in Southern Ontario, you can get caught in a tornado. So, and definitely in the United States. And if you were going out earlier today to go foraging and you're in South Carolina, you're dealing with Bertha. So you need to be very mindful of the weather because, hey, foraging is great, it's fun, but please be safe. Well, I wanted a picture of a sun, but of course you can't take a picture of a sun because it ruins the lens of your camera, or the retina, I guess. So this is a picture of sunrise, and many individuals in Thunder Bay will definitely be able to recognize this, the sleeping giant. I have a special place in my heart for Thunder Bay. It's just absolutely beautiful, and the sunrises there are gorgeous. However, the sun, when we're going out foraging, you want to make sure that you are protecting your skin. And now there's certain sunscreens out there that have been proven to cause cancer. There's a website, Environmental Working Group, EWG.org. This is a website in which it is run by professionals, and every year they test, I think, up to 500 sunscreens, and they do an annual report letting you know what ones are actually safe to put on your skin. And this is really important. So sunscreen if you want to protect your skin, and just be careful, because if it's really, really hot and you're out there foraging and you don't have water with you, you're setting yourself up for not really having a good experience. Wildlife. This was a situation I got into. It was actually kind of, it really took me by surprise. Last May, I was on Manitoulin Island and I went to a trail in Wikwemikong. As I drove into the parking lot, these 5 dogs, huge dogs, are chasing the car, barking. No one else is around for miles. And I'm thinking, uh-oh, what have I got myself into? Can I even get out of the car? I figured they were safe after a little while. And then as I entered the area where the trail began, this is the sign I read. And I thought, oh my gosh, this is so incredible. Now that sign should have been where you drove in, but regardless, be mindful of the wildlife. Know the area you're in and know what you could be coming up against. If you're up near Georgian Bay, watch it for the rattlesnakes. We've got bears in many locations right across Canada and the United States, coyote, wolves, and especially if you're out in September where there's moose, because moose rut in September, and that's the last animal you want to come across. Like, they're not very friendly in September. So be very careful of wildlife. If you are out there and you know there's bears are a possibility, have bear mace with you, bear bells. Just make sure you're doing some research first in order to best protect yourself. Know your surroundings. It is without a doubt, we can all get so excited when we see something and go, wow, I think there's that plant I've been trying to find for so long. And you get so excited. So let's say we were looking at a plant that was right near this tree and I go racing over there. Oops, the ground is not secure. Well, guess what? Now I'm going swimming whether I want to go swimming or not. So be very, very careful of the area you're in, know the terrain, and don't put yourself into a position where you're going to have to call 911. That's the last thing anybody wants when they're out there foraging. So now let's say you entered this area, you're foraging near the edge there. Always know you're out. And what I mean by that is if you've been following a trail, know where you came from and know where you're going to get out. Because what if you were here and you're enjoying the view, you've done some foraging and you've gathered up your bag and you turn around and you start heading back down the trail. Oops, there's the bear. So you need to know your surroundings in order to protect yourself. And it may sound a little scary, but you know, a little bit of knowledge can go a long way. Okay, I think a lot of us know this one. Mosquitoes, black flies, and no-see-ums. Oh my. Whether you choose to wear a product, whether it be off the shelf or a natural product, this is simply a choice. There are netted hats, netted clothing to help protect you. Again, this is a choice. And now for the TikTok. Okay, this is something that it's certainly not something I thought that would end up being perhaps one of the most feared things out in the bush. I mean, I think I have more of respect right now for the ticks than I do for a bear, because, well, for many reasons, and I'll get to that in just a sec. So, you don't want to get ticked when you're foraging. This is actually the name of a blog that I wrote. So if you go to my website and go to the blog portion, you'll see the blog, Don't Get Ticked While Foraging. There's a lot of information there. I really recommend that you go there and check it out. And keep in mind, foraging is an absolute incredible time to be out there and getting connected with nature, getting the fresh air. And when you find different plants, they're going to give you new flavors and textures that you can use in the kitchen. And it's a phenomenal experience. And the last thing you want to have to bring home is a tick or two on you. So as you're looking at this, I'm not going to read all this off. A lot of people are under the impression that when they have been bitten by an infected tick, they're only worried about Lyme disease, which is the Borrelia burgdorferi. That is not the only infection you can get from an infected tick. There are other co-infections, and most of those are going to give you symptoms and give you a life filled with absolute agony and grief. So if you have a tick, it is really, really, really important to get it tested. So before I get into when you're out there and you are specifically in an area where there's warnings that there's tick infestations. I know that sounds a little bit over the top or embellished, but there's many areas where you're almost guaranteed, and especially near ravines. So if you are able to wear long pants, take your socks and put your socks up over the pants, long sleeves on your shirts. Here in Canada, there's one store that sells permethrin treated clothing. Please do not put your trust into these specific items, because I purchased a pair of pants last autumn, brand new, never been washed, and I ended up with a tick on them. And so do they repel? Maybe, but obviously not, because this tick was on me. And had I not been paying attention, perhaps in 3 to 4 minutes, that tick would have made it right up and under my shirt, and I would have been taking it home, and by then it could have been feasting off my blood. So, which brings me to one really important piece of information is, please, I just mentioned it, check your body every 3 to 5 minutes when you're out there. More so if you've brushed up against a branch, Don't listen to what some of these professionals out there are saying, that the ticks are only in long grass. That's not the case. They're on branches that your head can hit. They are on branches that your waist can hit. They can be anywhere because they are transmitted through birds and other animals. So you've really got to be mindful. And many people will say wear light colored clothing. It does help, but it's not a guarantee that you're going to see that tick either. And as you're gathering wild food, give it a bit of a shake. And again, check your hands as you're looking. Just make sure you're not taking home somebody that you don't want. Now, if you find yourself with a tick and you've removed it properly from your body, in Canada, there really, in my opinion, is no other place to go to get it tested except this place right here, genetics. This is a private lab located in Southern Ontario, and within, I think it's 48 hours of receiving the tick, you will get the results of whether that tick had the bacterium or not. And you can pay a little bit extra and you can have it tested for all the pathogens. So without a shadow of a doubt, this is really important because we do have, I think in Ontario, they actually closed down, I think, Lita, if you want to jump in here, Ontario, I think, closed down the public labs.
I'm not 100%, but I know our local health unit is not, they're not testing for ticks right now. They're only identifying.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, I'm pretty sure I heard that in Ontario, they've shut down all public labs, so they're not even bothering anymore. And there's one lab in Winnipeg, but by the time you get results from that specific lab, it's 6 months, up to 6 months later, it's too late. You have to know within the first couple of weeks whether or not that tick had the Borrelia, that specific bacterium, in order to be put on the proper protocol of antibiotics. So timing is so critical. And if you want a tick tested for all pathogens, genetics charges $300. To me, that's well worth it. That would be money well worth, because it's just, you need to get on that protocol right away of a specific antibiotic. Anyway, enough of the tick talk and let's move along. Questions and answers.
All right. Just looking for questions around what you specifically just spoke about. But one person has, you mentioned chaga, has asked, can chaga be harvested from a dead fallen tree or will its virtues be spent?
If the tree came down within the last 48 hours, you're okay. Because, yeah, it has to, for it to have all the constituents in it, it has to be from a living tree. And it's not just birch, actually. It's from other trees that are in the birch family, such as ironwood, for example. So, yeah, a living tree is optimum. And unless you know that that tree came down within the last 48 hours, I would not be taking the chaga at that point. And yeah, let's stick to living trees.
Sounds good. One person has asked, I'm curious if there's a concern about eating a variety of plants at one time. Are there combinations we should avoid? I don't know if you want to answer this now or at the end. I'll leave that to you.
I can do that now.
Okay.
If you are generally a healthy person, you don't have any worries, no health conditions, but if you're brand new to foraging, I would take one plant at a time. Because what if you have, let's say, for example, you've just eaten the 6 different wild plants and you end up with a reaction. You're not going to know which specific plant gave you that reaction. Now, the reaction may be something simple to, like maybe just a stomach cramps or you're sitting on the toilet for a few hours, however, if you are brand new to foraging and you've not really had a big diversity of foods, I would definitely go one plant at a time. So should you get any reaction from it, you're going to know what it is.
Interesting. Here's another question that's sort of interesting. One person has asked, how should one deal with aggression or aggressive foragers when foraging? For example, if a fight happens over asparagus patches.
Oh my gosh, I could be so lucky. When I find asparagus, it's always too late. It's make no mistake, there are some foragers out there that will say, this is my patch, whether it be, I've not come across that with asparagus, but wild leeks, for example, or fiddleheads. And all of a sudden they're possessive about this one specific area because, hey, that's my patch. But it's not, because let's look, where are you? Are you on Crown land? Are you on public land? That's not your patch. But the last thing you need is to get into a whether it be a verbal or even worse, a physical confrontation with somebody because of a patch. So yeah, I guess just use your problem solving skills as best as you possibly can. Just say, hey buddy, you know, I'm just going to be over here. I won't interfere with you over there. And hopefully something like that would work. But if someone is being that aggressive, I would be pulling out my cell phone and recording this person.
Great. Do you want to keep going then, and we'll take the rest of the questions at the end?
We could do that.
Sounds good.
Okie dokie. Alrighty, so plant identification tips. Now, I would like to see, do you know what plant this is, Lita? I should have done this with you before this program. Because I was going to say, who's the first person?
I'm not
the first person. Oh, okay. I know, I should have told you what plant this is, and then and said, okay, who's the first person who has typed in, what is this plant? This is stinging nettle. And stinging nettle obviously has its name for a reason. Along the stems, the petioles of the leaves are trichomes. Trichomes are the stingers. Many people have bad reactions to these, and this is where your garden gloves would come into play here when foraging for stinging nettles. I tend to be a bit on the wild side, for lack of a better phrase, and I will harvest these guys with my bare hands. Do my hands sting? Absolutely. And if I'm lucky, I still have that numbing, tingling sensation 48 hours later. And I know that sounds insane, but in those trichomes are histamines and anti-inflammatories. So what's in there is actually really good for us. And I learned about 6 years ago that if every time you're out foraging and you see stinging nettle, whether you choose to take it or not, go sting yourself. Now, I'm not telling everybody out there to go sting yourself. This is just something I did for myself. And by doing that, should you have seasonal allergies, you know, your typical hay fever, then you're going to see the effects of it diminish as the years go by. Well, here I am about 6 years later, and I don't get seasonal allergies. Coincidence, or did it actually work? I believe it actually worked. But again, I'm not saying to everybody, please go out there and start stinging yourself with this. Don't do that. That could end up as a massive disaster. And before I move along, I just want to mention there's a really, really hilarious video or two on YouTube. You go there, go to the search end or the search bar there, and type in stinging nettle eating contest. It is absolutely mind-blowing. Even I wouldn't do that. So, alrighty, so we want to learn about plant identification. And for those of you who are brand new or pretty new at foraging, it can be a minefield out there of information in terms of where do I go, what do I do to learn how to properly identify plants. When doing this, I highly recommend that you get to know the botanical or the Latin name of each plant. And the reason being, when you're researching the name, if you type in the common name, depending on where you live, you could end up getting a plant that isn't what you have, and therefore misidentifying that specific plant. So Yeah, it's really important to, when you're researching, when you have identified a plant and you want to double check it, use the botanical or the Latin name. So where do you go to learn? If anyone is in your area who does plant walks, that is the best way, because you see it, it's right there, it's in front of you, it's wonderful. Is that happening right now because of COVID? No, it's not. So unfortunately, that one's a little bit on the back shelf right now. Books, get books. I am a fervent believer in books. There are many good books out there that help you identify. If you are in Canada, and I believe in the United States, they also have, the publisher is Lone Pine Publishing. The books that this publisher comes out with are without a shadow of a doubt amazing and well worth the investment. And a little plug for Mark, foragingtips.com. He has an incredible book called Foraging, and it's actually the Idiot's Guide to Foraging. So anyways, books are definitely something to have. Websites, there are a lot of really good websites out there to help you identify plants. Of course, mine, EdibleWildFood.com, Mark's, Foraging Texas, Wildman Steve Brill in New York City. He's got an incredible website as well. So when you have found out what your specific plant is, always cross-reference it with 2 or 3 other sources. Really important. Apps. I don't know where to go with this one. There is, I have had so many people say, they've named the app, it's no good, what can I recommend? And in reality, I can't recommend any app because I'm not an app type of person. And I've heard so many individuals complain about so many different plant identification apps. There isn't even anything out there I could recommend. I am aware that Wildman Steve Brill has an app. I've not seen it, but if I were to trust any app, his I would, because Steve has been around, as I mentioned earlier, for a long, long time. Okay, now if you're relatively new at foraging and plant identification, this method is tried, true, and tested. What you do is, whether this be your backyard or a local park or your neighbor's yard, what you do is just draw your imaginary line and a square, and inside that square, taking a picture is really good, and then take a look at each plant that you see in the photograph, and from there you'll see different characteristics, different leaf structures, and this is a great way to start identifying plants. The dandelion, I think pretty much that's a given. Most people know how to identify the dandelion. If not from the leaf, definitely from the flower. So when you are in this whole process of identifying plants, there's going to be some terminology that you may be kind of shaking your head at, going, what the heck does lobed mean? What do you mean by wavy margins? Now, this is something you may or may not wish to pursue, but I really recommend that you get to know some of the basics, because when it comes to websites and books, you're going to come across this terminology. And for example, look at the ground ivy. The ground ivy is really specific there by the margins. And what I mean by the margin, that's the outside shape of the leaf. So getting to know margins, there's different types of margins. I won't get into that right here, right now. And let's see, what else? Now, if you look at cleavers, if everybody takes a look at where that arrow is pointing to the cleavers, those leaves are in a whorl. And that's another type of description that you'll come across when you're identifying plants, are whorled leaves. Cleavers are great. They help to cleanse our system in the springtime. They are absolutely amazing for helping to clear up bruises on your body. And I've had definitely firsthand experience with that. And dandelions, ground ivy. Now the ground ivy tastes really, really good as a salad dressing. And I think my husband put it up on the website today. If not, it will be there tomorrow. It's a new recipe. And so, and it's everywhere. Some people may call this creeping Charlie. And whether you want to call it creeping Charlie, ground ivy, this is a mint. It is so incredibly powerful for us. It is healthy. And I think probably many people who have backyards will know, or they may not know what it is, but they know now what that plant is. Large leaf avens in the bottom left-hand corner. That leaf is kind of hidden underneath the dandelion leaf. Large leaf avens, there's actually two different plants, one in my area. One produces a white flower, one produces a yellow flower. So, and that brings in, well, how do I know, how can I identify this plant? And all you have are photos of the leaf or the leaves. Sometimes you have to be very patient and you need to wait until the plant flowers before you can make that firm identification. Let's see, dandelions, a lot of people say, well, dandelion leaves, yeah, I know they're really, really healthy, loaded with nutrition, but I just can't get past the bitterness. You're going to find a lot of wild plants do have some bitterness to them, and there's a reason for that. We as a species on this planet have come so far away from the food that we should be eating, and that means we should be eating foods that are bitter. Our liver has over 500, it does over 500 functions every day. And if we don't keep our liver in tip-top shape, it starts to break down, and that's when we start to become ill. Bitters are one of the things that our liver has to have to help it perform, maybe not all 500 functions, but a couple hundred of those functions anyways. So, but dandelions, to help reduce the bitterness, collect your leaves, and put them into a bowl of cold water. Let them sit there for, add a little bit of salt, not a lot of salt, just a little bit. And let them sit there for 2 to 3 hours. After that, rinse it, put it through a salad spinner, and you've got greens that actually taste really good. So, but we'll talk more about that next, in 2 weeks from now when we do the harvesting and uses. So, I mentioned ground ivy, aka Caribbean Charlie. There are many different plant families. Plant families, plants are put into specific families because of their identifying features. There are 2 plant families that I stress you get to know and get to know them well. Because if you learn what the identifying features are of a plant family, not only does this help you out in the plant identification process, but you also can find out whether it's edible or not. For example, check out where that arrow is right now. It may be difficult to see fully, but what you're looking at is a square stem. So you have a pretty much a 90-degree corners on the stem of the creeping Charlie. And you're going to find this on motherwort. You're going to find this on, of course, your cultivated mints, thyme, catnip. There's so many different plants out there that are in the mint family. They all have that square stem, and they can all be used internally, as long as you don't have any reactions to it, of course. But and that's amazing, because you can come up to a plant and say, who are you? I don't, and you're checking out the stem and you're feeling that stem and you're, whoa, wait a minute, that's a square stem. So it's a mint family. Right away, you know. Don't even look at any other plant in your plant identification books. Go straight to the mint family. And there you go. That's half the battle right there, is when you know what family it's in and how to specifically identify it. And that square stem is amazing. Okay, I can hear some of the sighs out there. Garlic mustard, really? Well, it sounds kind of crazy, but when certain plants grow profusely, I know there's a scientific reason, but sometimes I think there's another reason, and that they're telling us we need it. Our bodies need it. Our body is, many people are devoid of many nutrients. And so sometimes I think these plants are telling us, if you use me a lot more, you're going to be a lot more healthier. That may sound crazy to some people that may resonate well with, but it's certainly something I believe in. And so putting all that aside, the garlic mustard is in the mustard family, the brassica family. If you learn the identifying features of the mustard family, then you can, again, you're out there, you see a plant, and you see the identifying features of the mustard. You may not know which specific mustard plant it is, but you know it's a mustard, therefore it is deemed edible. The garlic mustard that you're looking at right now, unfortunately, you can't see where the leaves are down below, but the identifying features of a mustard plant, the leaves, of course, are on the stem down below there where you can't see. Then the seed pods form higher up on the stem, and at the top of the stem, of course, are the flowers. And each of those flowers have 4 petals. So the seed pods on the mustard plants are not always like this, what you see right now. Shepherd's purse, for example, have purse-like seed pods. There is the ball mustard, and those seed pods are ball-like. So, and there's, I don't even know how many plants there are in the mustard family. Dozens and dozens and dozens. There's an incredible amount of them. They are all edible one way or another. Some of them taste better than others. Garlic mustard, for example, every part of this plant is safe to consume. The flowers, the stems, the leaves, and even the root. If you like garlic, you'll like garlic mustard. If you like horseradish, you're gonna love the root of the garlic mustard. You can gather the roots and you can turn it into homemade horseradish, and it tastes incredibly close to horseradish. And I don't think there'll be anybody out there complaining about you picking up the garlic mustard and taking as much as you want. Now I'm looking at the time, and I think I've timed this presentation extremely well. How that happened, I will never know. Anyways, before I move on to my last frame, I just want to mention briefly about the parsley family. The parsley family is a group of plants in which they look very close. For example, many of you out there probably know the wild carrot, Daucus carota, there's your Latin name, or Queen Anne's lace. This is a plant that, yes, it is edible, and you need to know the identifying features of it in order to protect yourself, because the parsley family has toxic family members, like your hemlock, poison hemlock, and oh gosh, now I'm drawing a blank, that big one, the hogweed, giant hogweed. So you have to be very mindful of the parsley family, and you really, really need to go slow in the beginning with the parsley family when you're learning about these plants and whether to eat them or not, or which specific ones you can, because this is where you can make a mistake. I don't want to see anybody in hospital. Please, it's the parsley family, kind of leave that one towards the end in terms of learning, because it can be very, very tricky. Mustard family, no problem. Mint family, no problem. So what I'm going to do at this point is, it's almost 10:02, so what I'm going to do is wrap it up with this. We're going to go on to questions. I am on Facebook and YouTube, EdibleWildFood.com. And of course, Twitter, Pinterest, and Instagram as well. Although Instagram I'm rarely on, and Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube are more my platforms that I like to work with. So before moving along, I want to thank everybody for being here. And yeah, let's move to some questions and have some fun with those.
Okay, thank you, Karen. So I know you already recommended some books. Do you mind just renaming the publisher and the titles of the books for folks? I think some folks would like to hear that again.
Okay. There's many titles under the publisher of Lone Pine Publishing. This is a publisher, I believe they're out west, Western Canada. I think they're actually in the United States as well. And they publish different books specific to areas. There is, here in Canada, there's the Medicinal and Edible Plants of Canada. If you're a beginner, I think it's about $30. It's $30 well spent. And then they break out into different areas. Like I think there's one of the Northwest United States. But yeah, check out Lone Pine Publishing. They do have a website. You'll see all their different publications. I definitely recommend that. And Mark's book, The Idiot's Guide to Foraging, that's definitely an amazing book. And even my own PDF publications that I sell, my Fields of Nutrition, my winter survival food for those who are worried about how to feed yourself if the power goes out in January and there's 10 feet of snow, and my PDF publications, again, they're specific to one plant, everything you need to know about that one plant. And I actually have a website sale where they're not $5 each. If you buy 10, they're $3 each. So, but again, yeah, Lone Pine is definitely my favorite in terms of book publishers out there.
Perfect. One question someone has is, what type of tree or forest would you find morels in?
Morels? Oh, haha. Okay, there's an old saying that says the morels will grow wherever they want. Cedar, they tend to, there's a few places where they like to pop up. Number one, if you're in a location where there's cedars, specifically dead cedars, generally a lot of foragers are never blanked in those locations. Old apple orchards, those are really popular places to find morels. Elm trees, at the base of elm trees. Now, it isn't so much a matter of where are they, it's what are the weather conditions, and this is what people need to understand about the morel. Morels, I believe the ground temperature has to be 10 degrees Celsius. For anybody in the States, that's 50 degrees Fahrenheit. And then the morels will only grow until it's 17 degrees Celsius, which is, let's see, 20 is about 64 degrees. So they're very temperature, yeah, I'm trying to find the word, but anyways, there has to be that specific temperature range in order to find them. So it's not just location, it's temperature. And where I live here in Southern Ontario, we missed the boat. This specific area of Southern Ontario, we went from snow on the ground 2 weeks ago, so too cold for morels, to now it's 32 degrees Celsius. And for those in the United States, that's 90. So we missed the boat. There are no morels where I live. So hopefully that answers your question. Apple orchards, dead cedars, elm trees, but also that temperature range.
Great. One person says there's not a lot of info in her region on plant and fungi in eastern North Ontario. She's in Renfrew County. She's wondering if is there a place where she could find information on that? She thinks most of the information is from Southern Ontario.
You're going to get George Barron's mushroom book, Northeast. Hang on one sec. Hang on. Mushrooms of Ontario, Renfrew. This is for you, Renfrew, Ontario. Mushrooms of Ontario in Eastern Canada. Lone Pine publication. And it's written by George Barron.
Great, thank you. I have a question. Is it okay to collect maple leaves now to cure and salt for deep frying 8 to 10 months from now?
I do it every year.
Oh, go ahead.
I learned many years ago. My eldest son went to live in Japan for a year, and he brought to my attention a woman who does that actually, but she gathers the maple leaves in autumn. We can't gather maple leaves in autumn here because most of them end up with tar disease, and there's no way I would touch a maple leaf like that. So about 4 or 5 years ago, I experimented by gathering the leaves in the springtime, put them into a container with salt, yes, cure them, and months later down the road, absolutely, then you can make a tempura batter or any other type of batter and fry them up. Oh my gosh, they are amazing.
And does the age of the maple leaf matter?
No, because this woman in Japan who's been doing this for a long time, as I mentioned, she's gathering the leaves in autumn, and here it's just impossible to get good quality maple leaves here in the autumn time. So I pick mine now, and they sit in salt until Christmas or early next year, and wow, they turn out amazing.
Great. Another question, should you harvest burdock root in spring or fall, or does it matter?
Depends what you want to use it for. If you're using it for food, then gathering the root of the first year plant. Burdock is a 2-year, has a 2-year growing cycle. Year 1, the root is soft, it is vegetable-like, and so therefore if you're using it for edible purposes, you want to gather the root in year 1. A lot of people gather burdock root for medicinal purposes, and the optimum time for gathering burdock root is in the autumn of year 1, because all the nutrients and energy is being returned back to the root in order to come back in year 2. If you miss gathering it for medicinal purposes in the autumn of year 1, then you can get out there in spring of year 2 before the stem starts to grow.
Great. We have a question on the fiddleheads, which everyone's always so interested in. Is it necessary to boil them for 10 to 15 minutes if you clean them really well?
I fry them. I've never boiled them myself. I have eaten fiddleheads for many, many, many years. I will blanch them and freeze them. I use them for soups, but I saute them first. And usually when I saute them, it's for about 10 minutes. And yeah, I've never had a problem. But yeah, as long as they're sauteed for a low temperature, not high, for 10 minutes. But yeah, there's something about that 10-minute mark just to render them safe.
Okay. We have a question. How do you feel about foraging in questionable soil, such as in the city near roads?
Ooh, good question. Good question. I forgot that one. Oh my gosh. Whoever you are, great question. Okay. Okay, location. Number 1, you're not going to forage near a railway line. Railway lines are sprayed to keep the the weeds, or okay, I don't like that word weeds, but anyways, but the railway lines are sprayed to keep the wild plants down. Understandable. And so you don't want to be 50 feet. I always like to say 50 feet either side of a railway line, because some of the railway lines are also sprayed with creosote to help protect the wood. So city streets. Oh, that's okay. City streets, it really depends. If you are in a suburban area and you got your front lawn, but your street really isn't that busy, I wouldn't worry about it. If you have buses going up and down all day long and trucks going up and down all day long, I'd be a little bit further back from the road, like maybe about a good maybe about 10 feet. And if you're more in a rural area, it's just take a look at the setting, take a look at the road. I'll harvest plants that are really close, and I mean like 2-3 feet from a country road. They're going to be dusty. You wash it off, no big deal. And yeah, and if you're in the city, also know if your neighbors are spraying. I think that's really important. Or spraying pesticides, that is. So it's use your best judgment. If you're on a road and it's higher up and there's lots of wind and toxins can't settle, I think that's okay. But if you're in a low-lying valley where toxins can gather, I'd be concerned about that.
Sounds good. Next question is gardening versus foraging. What are the advantages and disadvantages between the two?
Ooh, well, gardening, I would say the advantage is you get exactly what you set out to do, so long as you do it right. And you don't get the pests coming in and eating your cultivated foods. I think it's the best of both worlds. And you get a lot of wild foods that grow in with your garden. Don't go pulling everything out of your garden. If you get the occasional dandelion growing in your garden, that's okay. If you get some wood sorrel, that seems to pop up in gardens a lot, and purslane can really overtake in a garden. Leave some there because they're adding essential nutrients to the soil, which is really critical to help your vegetables maximize for their nutritional values. But yeah, gardening is incredible. It's empowering. connects you with nature. And of course, foraging is, sometimes it's hit and miss. You may head out one day saying, well, I'm going to go out there today and I want to be able to come home with some burdock and maybe some yellow dock, and then you get blanked. So gardening, you have more control, I guess.
Okay. One question, oh, sorry, I did just want to mention that Karen has graciously offered to stick around for another 10 minutes to answer questions. So if you have to go, that's fine, but we will go through a few more questions. So the next question is, how does the histamine in stinging nettle help with seasonal allergies? Wouldn't people feel worse because it contains histamine, hence antihistamines?
It works with the antibodies in your blood. Somebody, it was a scientist who once explained it to me, and I just took some jot notes and I didn't write everything down. And it was just one of those happenstance meetings, so I never had a chance to follow up. But scientifically, how it's specific, like how it really works within our blood, I don't know. But one thing I do know is I love using myself as a guinea pig, and I will try certain things on my body that I really wouldn't, some of them I will never share with anybody because I just like to check things out. But how specifically it works is something to do with the antibodies within your body when you're trying to fight off the pollen. And for some reason it works. It's incredible, but it does work. And on the as far as the anti-inflammatories go that are in those trichomes, what is really interesting is you've got a lot of people with arthritis, and actually there's some individuals with sciatica. They actually grab stinging nettles and hit the area of the body that's inflicted, but with the arthritis or the sciatica, and they are getting incredible results. I don't know if I would recommend that to anybody, but but it really speaks to the power of this plant.
Great. Another question is, I found a lot of mosquitoes or flies on stinging nettle. Can I still harvest them?
Yep, absolutely. Stinging nettle is one of those plants that when you get them in early spring, the insects they haven't come out yet, and they haven't started eating that plant. It's actually a bona fide or affirmation that this is a really good healthy plant because the insects are getting at it. So do you want to eat the mosquitoes? Well, extra protein in your diet? I can't say that would be good, but you're going to shake off the bugs, or you're going to rinse off the plants. And but yeah, if a plant has had insects eating it, I wouldn't worry about it.
Okay. Some folks are wondering if you can say the name. Is it Steve Brill? Perhaps you could spell it for them.
Oh, Steve Brill? Okay, his name is, you will find him not by his name, because his name is actually pretty common. So when you Google it, you have to Google Wildman Steve Brill, Brill.
Great, thank you. Okay. Another question is, do you think there should be any regulations regarding at-risk vegetables such as ramps, especially for commercial use? By the way, they are rampant in some parts of the UK.
Oh, absolutely. In Virginia, many parts of, I don't know whether it's Virginia or West Virginia or maybe both, they actually have ramp festivals. And so therefore, protection of that plant is certainly not a concern, one iota. Again, this goes back to a question that has to be answered regionally. In Quebec, for example, back in the late 90s, it was restaurant owners and purveyors of wild food would send people out into the Laurentians. They would pillage the ramps year after year. This is a plant that takes 7 years from the time the seed germinates to the time it produces a seed. So when you take the plant, you've taken its total ability to reproduce. And so laws had to come into place, and there was some pretty stiff fines in Quebec in order to try to bring back the ramp population. I know that certain parts of Ontario, this is now becoming a bit of a problem. I know I've seen a couple of areas where people have been paid by restaurant owners in Toronto. They come up to the forests north of Toronto, and they're not being taught how to properly harvest. And so you get areas which are totally decimated. So again, some areas are really blessed, and you've got ramps as far as the eye can see, and nobody could ever put a dent in the pile. But then you've got other areas where we're struggling.
Great. Next question. Do you have any favorite plants to forage on the northeast coast of the US? And will you be touching on harvesting mushrooms in the next webinar?
I could. Actually, I will. But it'll be the mushrooms that I know that you can identify and not make a mistake. Mushrooms are, anybody who goes to my website will see that the amount of plants that I have versus the amount of mushrooms, there's a big difference there. And the reason being is that there are so many different mushrooms out there. You really, really, really need years of experience to know how to properly identify. And if you make a mistake with plants and you eat the wrong plant, you'll chances are you're going to get through the storm. You know, you may end up sitting on the toilet for 5 hours wishing that your toilet reclined. You know, like, but that's going to be the worst thing. But with a mushroom, it's your life you're dealing with. It's the end of your life. So I can and I will address some mushrooms, but ones that are very easy to identify. And as for my favorite plants that would be in Northeast United States, I would have to say without a shadow of a doubt, I love stinging nettles. I love my creeping Charlie, or ground ivy. Some people, like I say, again, that's the common name discrepancy with some people. And the dandy dandelion. It's just an amazing plant. And I would also say yellow dock, or curly dock. Some people call it curly dock. It's very common down there, and it's really tasty.
Great. Next question is there anything that acts as an anti-inflammatory that's common to find in Ontario?
Oh, okay. Well, you're stinging nettle, but that's kind of a hard way to do it. But that's a more of a topical way to deal with it. In terms of, okay, being an herbalist, that's kind of a broad question. So being an herbalist, my question would be, what specific ailment is it that you're looking to treat? What's inflamed? Is it a joint? Is it the meniscus? Is it so I would say probably, oh gosh, again, this is a very tricky question to ask when I don't know what specifically needs to be treated. So I'm going to use the blanket answer, which is your turmeric. But don't just buy any turmeric, because you want to make sure that it's grown ethically and it's grown organically. And the turmeric doesn't work properly as an anti-inflammatory unless you have some black pepper with it, because you need the two to go together.
Okay. Question, can you eat nettles and garlic mustard all year round, or do they become inedible at some point?
Stinging nettles have what I call a short lifespan. After springtime, the plant obviously grows. It can get to heights of 3 feet tall, 1 meter. And then at that point, the leaves are being totally decimated by insects. And so therefore, to be able to eat this fresh, it's definitely seasonal. Unless you wanted to harvest it and dry it out and use it throughout the year by adding it to soups, stews, mashed potatoes, or wherever. Because once it's dried, those trichomes no longer can sting you. As for the garlic mustard, and here's a good thing. This is applicable to not just garlic mustard, any mustard plant. They germinate in the autumn and they overwinter. So come spring, the leaves are there. Now they're going to produce the stem and the flower and the seeds. So yeah, basically garlic mustard can be harvested in Ontario in any winter environment. where it grows 12 months out of the year. As long as you know where garlic mustard grows, it can be under 10 feet of snow. You just remove the snow, you're going to see it. It's still vibrant green.
Okay. Someone has asked, there's so many varieties of nettle. Is it best to just stick to stinging as it has a defining identification property?
Depends what you, if you're looking, if you're right in the beginning of learning about different plants and how to identify them, yeah, stick with stinging nettle. Learn all about that plant first, and then branch out. If the beautiful thing about foraging and learning about all these plants, and I mean, I'm guilty of this too. It's like, oh, what's this? What's this? I've gotten into areas, and I mean, even now, I can identify hundreds of plants, but there's always something new out there. And I totally understand that excitement of, oh my gosh, what's this? You know, what's this? What's this? You know, is this going to be something I can use medicinally or edible? But as far as nettles go, just, yeah, stick with one and slowly branch out.
Great. How can you seed an area for morels using dried ones? What season would you do that? And do you make a slurry, and do you disperse them on top of soil or under leaves?
Sorry, can you repeat the beginning of that?
Sure. How can you seed an area for morels if you're using dried morels?
You can't. You need the spores. And spores are only from the live morel. Now, there are places that you can, where you can actually get the kits to grow your own mushrooms. They would have the mycelium, they would have spores, and these would be the places that you need to go to. But by actually taking a dried morel and planting it, it won't work. You do need to have, like I say, the mycelium and or spores in order to get that to work.
Okay. Let's see. Other than salad, what can we do with dandelions? How do we use the roots? Well, maybe you'll get that to next week.
Yeah, I'll get into that next week more so. But think about the one thing with wild food is you can just let your imagination go. Just think of any and all of your favorite recipes that you've enjoyed and add dandelions into those existing recipes. And sometimes you're going to find that, you know, it's a hit or miss, but by playing around in the kitchen and having some fun, you've gathered all these dandelions, they're free. So you really are not losing much of anything in terms of monetary value when recipes fail. But yeah, it's just lose any inhibition you have and go wild, have fun.
Okay. Someone wants to know, do you eat most of your foraged food fresh, or do you mostly use things for teas, salves, and ointments?
Well, I would say right now, probably 20% of what I eat in a day is fresh. But I do a lot of foraging for the winter. So the vast majority of what I gather is to be frozen, is to be stored, dried, and or made into pesto, and I freeze the pesto. Yeah, because I like to have a good supply of my wild foods throughout the winter time.
Perfect. I'm only going to bring up a couple more and then we'll wrap it up. But someone is wondering if it's okay to eat plants in a yard that has been fertilized with general store-bought fertilizer.
Eesh. I wouldn't. It really depends because there's so many different brands of fertilizers, and some are organic and some are chemical based. If it was chemical based, I'd be staying away from that like the plague. If it was organic, but sometimes even organic can't be trusted 100%. But yeah, I would do a little bit of research on specifically what that fertilizer has in it, because sometimes there's certain ingredients in there that are questionable.
Okay. And this might be a tough question, but someone is wondering, what do you think the most nutritious wild edible plant is? So good luck with that one.
Well, I could be cheeky and say compared to vegetables in the grocery store, just about all of them, in my opinion. I have subscriptions to various scientific journals across the world. Many universities around the world are doing extensive studies into the nutritional value of many of these wild plants. This is where I get the vast majority of my research from, and it is absolutely astounding the amount of nutrients that are in, like from the common dandelion to your stinging nettle to your yellow dock to your fiddleheads, purslane, you name it. The nutritional values are sky high. And I know eating 100% of wild is basically very, very difficult to attain, but by incorporating many of these plants into our daily diet, you basically can negate having to use any vitamin supplements because you're getting them from the wild foods.
Perfect. Okay, well, I think I'll wrap it up now. There's still some questions left, but we have the webinar in 2 weeks, and that's going to focus on storage and preserving and harvesting, which I think lots of these questions are about. That sounds good to you, Karen?
Okay, if you have a question and you feel that it hasn't been answered in this specific webinar, please feel free to email me. I will not be able to guarantee that I can answer all questions within the next 24 hours, but over the next 2 or 3 days, I will try to answer your questions. You can email me, info@EdibleWildFood.com. And if anybody, again, is interested in checking out being able to get 5 free $5 PDF files, be sure to purchase my Fields of Nutrition and Winter Survival Food. But make sure you put Webinar 101 in the additional information box so I know you came from here.
Perfect. Okay, so I just want to give a round of virtual applause to Karen. Thank you so much, Karen, for taking the time to present to us and share your wealth of experience. I think, that at least I can speak for myself and say it was informative, and I'm a beginner, so that was a good foundational introduction. I'm excited to learn more. So as we mentioned, Karen has graciously offered to present a second webinar on harvesting wild foods, preserving and storing. And that will be June 10th, 7 to 8 p.m. The link to the registration is in the chat if you want to find that. This recording will also be available. I think it'll be available in a couple places, but one that I know of is lakeheadu.ca/about/sustainability. So if you can Google Lakehead Sustainability, you should find that website. And on behalf of Lakehead University's Office of Sustainability, I want to thank you for joining us and taking the time to be here. Good luck foraging, and have a great day.
And thank you again, Lita. Thank you, Lakehead University, and thank you to each and every one of you out there who has stuck it out to the end. I really appreciate your support. Thank you.
Bye.